No problem. Everyone, good morning. So again, my apologies for not being there with you. So this morning I'm going to talk to you about AAC Clyde Space, giving you an introduction to the company and give you an update of how we have been doing over the last year, and also talking a little bit about our plans for the future. In terms of who we are a company that specializes in helping other companies, institutions, governments to get into space. And we do this by supplying space products, so computers, power systems that other manufacturers, including their own satellites. But we also supply full mission, so satellites ready to be in orbit or in orbit to our customers around the world. And we also supply data and services from our own satellites. So we use our space products to build our satellites, and we use our satellites to deliver data and services to our customers. And this is very much the business model that we have been following for the last few years. And effectively, we see this as a way of covering all the needs of the space user community. We are a company that has been operating for more than 25 years. We are a group companies. We now have companies in 5 different countries. We have 6 companies in 5 different countries. We are present in Europe, in the United States, in Africa, and we are roughly 190 employees across the group. We own and operate our own fleet of satellites. Currently, we have 10 in orbit. We have a few more to launch in the next year or so. And we operate on net margins of about 10-15% in hardware and about 30-40% in data and services. I will talk a bit more about that later in this presentation. But very much what we have been doing over the last 3-4 years is actually changing our business mix to shift from just hardware, being just a hardware company, to delivering these data and services, because we see that as a better way of growing the company and achieving the performance targets that we have for the coming years. And if you look at our numbers for 2023, we have continued our growth. So our revenues were 276 million SEK, what was a growth of about 41% in relation to 2022. And one thing that was very important for us in 2023 was to be EBITDA positive. So we achieved an EBITDA around 1 million SEK, 980,000 SEK. And that was a very important marker for us. It was actually a demonstration that our business is not only growing, but also becoming more efficient and also becoming stronger. And that is also shown by the growth of our order backlog. It now stands at 630 million SEK, a growth from about 400 at the end of 2022. And this just shows that the demand for our products, for our services, is strong and continues to grow. And if we look towards the future for 2024, we expect our revenues to be in the range of 430 to 500 million SEK. This is underpinned by the start of several services and data services, but also by the strength that we see in the products and satellite business. After a slight lull following the pandemic, the demand has actually grown for these during the last year or so. And we expect to have an EBITDA of around 5-10% of revenue and also be cash flow positive in the year. So in terms of how we are going forward, how we are looking towards the future, we see great opportunity, as I say, mostly because of the revolution that we have seen over the last 20 years in space, with the introduction of small satellites, and small satellites have actually grown dramatically the capabilities or what you can do at a reasonable and affordable price from space. And what this is doing is opening a whole new market in data and services that in the past used to be limited to government, that control the data sources, control the satellites, but now private companies like ourselves and many of our clients are capable to actually place in orbit networks of satellites that are actually delivering data and services to customers on the ground that need that data and don't necessarily want to actually own any satellites. And this need for data is driven by several mega trends or large trends, you want to call them, particularly the need for all of us to become more sustainable. And the way that we actually manage or monitor how we are doing and where we actually have to act is preferentially from space. Space is a great vantage point. It allows you to actually see things on a global scale. You're not seeing just your region, you are seeing the global system. And that is how we understand how, for instance, our climate is changing. That's how we understand how to better manage our climate, our oceans, and, for instance, predict our weather better. And for that, we need to be in space. And that is driving the demand for data. Now, many companies, many organizations have no interest in owning satellites. Operating satellites is something that requires a bit of work, it requires a bit of experience, and many organizations don't want to do that. They just want to access the data. And so we are now able to actually provide that to those organizations. At the same time, we see quite a lot of demand for information because of Internet of Things. As you might have heard, our world is becoming connected. And everything that we make these days carries a chip that allows us to communicate with that item. And that produces huge amounts of information, also produces a huge capability to control the world around us. But for that, we need even more information. To make the right decisions that allow us to control the world around us correctly, we need information. So another reason for why more data is being required and requested. And then the blue economy. The oceans are very critical for all of us. And in that way, we have to actually better manage the oceans. So we as a company are benefiting from these demand for information, these need for more and better data. And this is driving very much the growth of our business. So, as I mentioned, we do hardware. We do quite a lot of hardware. We sell quite a lot of components for satellites. We sell quite a lot of satellites to customers. But over the last few years, we have been investing in growing our ability to deliver data and services to our customers. And this high quality data delivered directly from our satellites to our customers is in increasing demand. People are demanding for more data. And if we have more satellites in orbit delivering more data, we'll be selling more data. Currently, we have 10 in orbit. We have another 4 to be added in the next 18 months with a plan to actually grow that constellation substantially over the next few years. We have created different access models to our customers, and that reflects a bit what the market needs. So we've got what we call secured capacity, where basically someone comes to us and say, I want full access to a certain percentage of your satellite for a certain amount of time. Usually they want full access to the entire capacity of a satellite for X number of years, for a few years. And we say, yes, okay, we'll build and put the satellite in orbit for supplying just that customer from that satellite. Usually they will have exclusive access to that data. We also have a subscription model where people subscribe to receiving a certain amount of data every year. These are renewable contracts, usually. We have several of these contracts running. And these are contracts that allow customers more flexibility, also allow more flexibility to us. We usually own the data, and we sell the data to different customers depending on their needs. And then we also have a pay per access. Some customers just want to access occasionally certain amounts of data, or for instance, they want to actually go through our historical data. We have, for instance, on ship tracking, we have one of the world's largest data sets for many years. And as such, we sometimes have customers that come to us and they want to see trends in the shipping industry, for instance. And so they come to us and ask us for that data. So these are the three models that we operate in when it comes to data and services. And what services and how do we expect this to grow? We expect this to grow to about 1.2 billion SEK by 2030. What will be around 60% of our revenue by then. And we see this because, as we say, there is quite a lot of demand for information and for data. And so much that we have actually decided to expand some of our offerings. So we currently we have 3 satellites launched last year, delivering hyperspectral data for the agricultural sector. So as you probably will be aware of, food production is a big challenge for us as a society. And so over the last 20, 30 years, there has been an increased importance in increasing yields, the quantity of food we produce, without damaging the environment. So we want to actually produce more food without increasing the amount of fertilizer we use, the amount of energy, and without creating further pollution. And to do that, we need to become much more efficient. Now, space data, so in images taken from satellites, are a very important part of that. So they're already used by governments around the world to actually predict how much food is being produced. That's how we know that we are not going to run out of food. But it's increasingly important, that data, for actually improving the yields, to improving the way we actually produce our food. And with that in mind, we started a project a few years back to deliver hyperspectral data. Those 3 satellites are in orbit. We are getting ready to start service with a customer that bought the entire capacity from those satellites. But we saw an opportunity to actually grow our constellation even further in this area. And as such, we are currently in the process of building 4 satellites, the first of which will be launched towards the end of this year or beginning of next year, to deliver a different type of data, but still very important data for the agricultural sector. We identified a niche in the market, an area that was underserviced by the current supply of data and information. And we are actually targeting that part of the market. And as I say, we will have the first satellite operational next year, followed by 3 others to provide these daily coverage, low Earth orbit imagery, very high quality imagery to the agricultural and forestry sector. And for instance, a few weeks ago, we actually started a project in Scotland to actually use some of these data, or for preparing for using some of these data in the future to monitor forests in Scotland. So this is showing the interest that this kind of information has for the market. And at the same time, we continue to invest strongly in the maritime and offshore energy sectors. We are in the process of developing the first VDES communication service for the oceans. So this is a VHF data exchange service. Some of you might be familiar with AIS, automatic identification system, that is already in orbit. We already have several satellites delivering that service. You can see on the top right image, every red dot is a message, is a ship that we have identified from one of our satellites. And these satellites are being used to track the shipping around the world. Now, the next generation of this system is this VDES system. And we are aiming to be the first ones, or to be one of the first, but we would like to be the first ones to actually deliver a service from orbit using this new system. Our first satellite of this technology was launched earlier, or launched last year. It has now been deployed. It's now getting ready to actually going through its commissioning. commissioning. And it was done together with Saab and Orcom in our Uppsala site. And the objective of that satellite is to demonstrate this service, to demonstrate this capability. We then have a plan. We have 2 other satellites in manufacture for ourselves. We have another satellite that we are manufacturing for a customer, all around this VDES system. So we see this as a great opportunity to actually improve the way that we manage the maritime sector, the ship traffic around the world. And it also allows us to introduce a communication layer. So while AIS is very much a passive system, you receive messages from vessels around the world. VDES isn't. VDES allows you to communicate back. So we can actually provide a communication service, particularly for safety of navigation aspects and information. So to make the maritime sector, to make navigation much safer for the big vessels, the big ships that are crossing the oceans. And we are developing around these some activities with some energy companies of how we can use this technology to better manage wind farms, offshore wind farms, for instance. That is something that we are doing right now. We have a program called Oscar to develop those technologies and those services. So you see that this is not just about putting satellites in orbit. This is very much also about the services that we can provide on the ground for our customers and clients. So in some cases, we operate via partners where we sell them or we provide them the data and they then resell it to the world. But in some cases, we have identified some sectors, some verticals in the business that are underserviced. And in those cases, we are developing applications directly from our data to support those sectors. So in terms of how we plan to do this, so as I said, in 2023, we increased our AIS capability, our AIS capacity, and we finished and launched our first VDES satellite. We are now actually in the process of actually preparing it for commissioning, but our objective is to by the end of next year to have a demonstrated VDES service and expanding our AIS services, with a view that by 2026 we will offer a global VDES service. So our objective is by 2026 to have enough satellites in orbit, ourselves and some of our partners to actually have enough satellites in orbit that we can actually deliver a service to the shipping industry. And then we want to continue to grow that. On the farming and forestry, as I mentioned, so we have launched and we are in the final phases of commissioning our hyperspectral constellation. We have a customer that buys 100% of that data. But by next year, we want to actually have our next constellation, our next set of satellites delivering an improved service to a different customer base. But nevertheless, that is where we are targeting. And then in the future, we are looking at not only growing that constellation, but also start providing services, value-added services to some customers and some organizations. And we are working on all of those right now. So just to summarize the presentation in terms of the company, we are a company with quite a long experience in building space technology. So we build components, we design, design and build satellites. We have our own facilities to do all of that. And what we have been doing over the last few years is using that experience and that knowledge to grow into the delivery of data and delivery of services to customers on Earth. And we do that based on our experience, on our long experience, but also on our business model that we believe is strong. And it has shown over the last few years that we are growing, has shown its strength through our growth and through the increased financial resilience of the company. So I will close here. I thank you for your attention, and I will open the floor for any questions that there might be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you. You hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, good. So I'll start off here and shoot off a few questions. It will be pretty numbers focused, and that's because, I mean, you have a long history and the beginning. Oh, this is great. All these satellites and everything is possible, and you know, the euphoria of a startup. But now you're breaking even on EBITDA and hopefully on new parameters. So now this is the reality bite part of stock investing, and this is where you need to take off. I don't know if the stock chart will go all the way to the moon, but that's what we look for. But now this is actual sales. So it will be. I'm just apologizing for having a few kind of boring accounting type questions. But first off, let me just check. Your areas are products, missions, and space data as a service. Just to give us, I know you had that on the slide, but give us an overview and a customer on each segment, and also the parts that add up to the AAC quarterly reports.
So in terms of the products business, that's where we started very much. So we have quite a wide portfolio of customers around the world. We supply to many large organizations, primes, large space primes doing big missions. So one of ours, just for curiosity, one of our subsystems, one of our products is currently going to the moon on a moon lander. So it's just an example, but it's by no means our biggest part of the business. Our biggest part of the business in product is the supply of constellations. So as you might be aware, many countries are building, or many companies are building several satellites of the same type to provide a service, and we are providing components to many of those. Some of our clients, I can name some in Europe, for instance. We work quite a lot with OHB Sweden, so we provide subsystems for them. We supply several subsystems to US companies, many of which don't particularly like to be named. It's always a challenge, but we supply quite large numbers of components and parts from our companies around the world. And we have licensing agreements also. We have a royalty agreement with York Space Systems in the US, where they produce our subsystems under license, for instance. So that's the bulk of the business. We still have a strong business supplying universities, for instance, on CubeSat, on the CubeSat modules. For the commercial primes, where we see a big business these days, is for what we call small satellites, so the 100 kilo, 200, 300 kilo spacecraft. That's where we are seeing quite a strong demand. On the satellites, our customers are a mix. So you'd find on our customer base many years ago, mostly startups around the world. These days, you won't see that. You'll see a much bigger mix. There are some companies that are just starting, and they are just asking us to build their first demonstration satellite. But we do have a few others that are actually quite well-known companies. For instance, we worked with Eutelsat on some satellites for them. We have worked with a few other companies actually delivering satellites to them, some larger organizations. And we see that market actually growing, not to numbers of thousands, but we see numbers, we see some resilient companies and organizations that are now thinking about building constellations of satellites, and they are coming to us. On the data and services, that is a market that is not totally new in the space industry, but is a market that has been developing over the last few years. So is a market that is not traditionally a CubeSat or small satellite domain, but it has been growing. And what we are seeing is the companies coming to us are usually companies in the terrestrial field with strong businesses delivering information already. Some of which have been buying data from satellite owners, but they are not satisfied with the type of data or the type of service they get. So they want a dedicated service, a dedicated capability, but they don't, as I say, they don't want to own satellites. They don't want to have the ground stations and the people to manage them. So they prefer to actually just buy a service from it. And in some cases, in other cases, there are companies that actually have used space, have used satellites in the past, but they have decided they want to continue. They need the data, they need the information, but they are not interested in actually continuing to own those assets. So they are moving more to this model. And you also see companies that never used space data, never used space information, but because now there is this model of operation, they say, oh yeah, that's something I can live with, and I can add that data set to my information, to my information service to my customers.
Okay. The issue with bandwidth, and anybody that's been on a Norwegian flight going out from Sweden and tried their free internet know that if you have a large email to send, hit it immediately. When people start going to social media after 5 minutes, there is no bandwidth left. So and the value of the megabytes are hugely. Sometimes it's life and death, sometimes it's nothing. Like, let's say, starting now, I manage my own stock portfolio much better than I have done. I invest in AAC Clyde space and 3 other companies, and they all take off. So I decide to buy a 50-foot yacht. Not only do I manage that, but I managed to persuade my fiancée that this is the smart way to go. So then we have a 50-foot yacht. But we also have 4 daughters. And they will join us for an offshore leg going from Puerto Morgan to West Indies. Now, I don't know if you cover that area, you can relate to that maybe. But what do they do when they come on the boat? They're bored, so they will each stream 4K versions of Love is Blind on one screen each. That wouldn't be possible if I don't pay $1 zillion still, would it?
I think you do have systems, you do have services nowadays, not wanting to make publicity to one in particular, but of course Starlink is the one that is now quite accessible in many respects, even on ships. We for instance, we have stayed away directly from the broadband capability, because that's a market that is a mass market, requires a huge investment. You know, talking in the billions of dollars. We believe that is a game that is only for a few select few in the world. So that's not the area we are dealing with. But of course, we do suffer from that, like most satellite operators, because there is, as we generate more data in space, as we generate more services, we actually need more bandwidth for our own satellites to deliver the data. That's partly why we have actually invested in, for instance, in developing laser communications for the ground. And we just demonstrated, we just announced that the demonstration of our first laser terminal was successful. And that is exactly to make us less dependent on radio frequency spectrum. So as we increase the amount of data that we generate on our satellites, and it is growing, particularly on Earth observation, we generate large amounts of data. We actually are creating the mechanisms to be able to be less dependent on the very limited, and you are totally right, on the very limited availability of spectrum for communications that limits the bandwidth of what you can actually send down. So we are already addressing that. But when we come to our business, we are staying away from providing the services that are dependent on that. So the VDES service, for instance, although it is a communication service, is not intended for your daughters to see 4K video. It is intended to be able to tell the captain of the ship if there is a big storm coming their way and you are all going to sink. So that's to avoid that we are actually doing the VDES system.
Yeah. So I see you're avoiding the numbers here. So let me specify. I'm reasonably successful. It's a reasonably big yacht, and my budget for a satellite internet is 100,000 Swedish kronor per year. How much bandwidth would I get for that number?
I don't know. I suspect you could get a few hundred megabits per second these days on something like Starlink. I don't know their pricing structure, but I think they have models for mobile assets like yachts these days that with 100,000 you probably could start getting that kind of numbers. Probably not yet. You'd have to see the price. Depending on where you are and who you are, Starlink has different models. But you start getting quite nice. You might need a bit more money than that, but not much more.
Okay. Thank you. Clarifying. I'll start working on that.
I'll make sure that Starlink pays me some commission for this.
Yes. I'm sorry to use that example. Let's go to the numbers and the specifics. End of last year, you had a malfunction in the Kelpie 2 satellite that I guess you're both the buyer and the seller, because the Kelpie 2 was going to be used for your space station as a service offerings, but it malfunctioned, and you wrote that down in your recently reported Q4 by 6.5 million Swedish.
Yes.
My question is, you also created your own market because Kelpie 2 will need to be replaced, I guess, by Kelpie 3 that AAC sells to AAC. But what was the full value of that satellite, and how will that be handled going forward?
So that was actually the value of the satellite, of the asset. Of course, we have forward contracts on that satellite. So our objective is to actually build more satellites. We actually have 2 more VDES AIS satellites being ready in the US to launch later this year. So they were not intended to replace that, but they will increase our capacity and our ability to offer to our customers. We're also working with some partners in accessing other data. So yes, that was the value of the satellite, and it was unfortunate. It was a malfunction of the antenna. The satellite is working perfectly, actually. It's a pity because I was talking to my engineers yesterday, and they were well impressed with the performance of the satellite, but the antenna didn't deploy, and that's why we can't deliver our service, our data service.
Good morning. I'm Rutger Smith. On one of your slides, you said that you could provide data at a price 50% of the closest competitor. How is that, and can that stay that way for some time?
So partly the reason for that is technology has evolved quite a lot. So our closest competitor in that sector is using satellites that were built several years ago. They were much bigger, more expensive. And actually we can now build the same performance with a much, much lower investment. That is one way we can do that. And as such, our ability to actually have a much lower price is there. Will it stay like that? I expect some competition. I always expect competition. I don't think we are geniuses that we are the only ones to have certain ideas. So of course we will have competition. I don't see anyone in the horizon that will be able to lower the price. We could actually go a bit further if we had to. So we can be even more competitive if we had to be more aggressive.
Yeah, and then you have a big backlog. Is that typical for the industry, or will you have to grow your capacity to deliver systems?
It used to be very common in the industry in a few years past on large satellites, mostly because you tend to have contracts with large values, and so the backlog can be quite large. We have a plan to deliver that backlog without without having to grow dramatically the company. We use subcontractors, we use suppliers. A lot of the work is done by subcontractors to us. So actually we can do that without having to grow dramatically the company. We do have opportunities always on our pipeline that might require a little bit of growth, but we're always very careful not to actually take on work that would demand huge growth of our costs. So very much we are focused on not having to increase the size of our facilities, not having to increase the number of people that we have doing things. So we are looking always for ways of being more efficient. For instance, in our Uppsala operation, we did quite a lot of work last year in improving the way we test things. Testing is a big thing in space, so you spend a lot of time. So we actually reduced test times from days to hours. So now we can test modules that used to take a week to test in about 3-4 hours. And that actually is a huge improvement when you are doing tens of the same system.
3 questions left and limited time, so we'll do one from the audience and final 2 from me. We'll try to speed up.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask you about the life length of one satellite, and where is the rocket station located? Is it in northern Sweden, or where do you, because this must be a cost really to a contract to start up those satellites. And finally, are the messages, the data cryptated?
Sorry, could you repeat the last?
Crypto message, is it cryptated,
yes.
the data?
So the satellites, our aim these days is for satellites, they are designed to last 5 years. We expect satellites to actually last a bit longer than that, but we design them with an expectation of 5 years. And we are seeing that now on our satellites, lasting that kind of, having that lifetime. In terms of launch, we tend to go where the price is right. So, and where we are allowed to launch. Of course, there are some countries where you can't launch from these days. The best price right now, speaking again about Elon Musk, is with SpaceX in the US. So we have been launching mostly from there. In the past, we've launched from other locations, but US, Florida, California have been the main places. We are eagerly awaiting the development of the European launch sites, like Northern Sweden, like S-Range and Scotland. We are eagerly awaiting those because we believe that competition will be good for the market. So if there are more rockets, that's going to make prices go down, and that makes our business better. It's great if you are in the satellite business, terrible if you are in the rocket business. But that's the life. And finally, on the encryption, yes. So satellites, we encrypt data. So it depends very much on the customer. Some customers actually don't want it for their own reasons. But we do encryption on the data, commanding data. It's usually encrypted, or at least the option is there.
Thank you. We have a question from one of your investors that was sent to us, and it seems that it's hard to figure out from what you press release what your sales are. The claim here in the question is that you press released 65% of your sales for 2023, and that's if you look at ingoing balance and outgoing balance on the order backlog and the invoiced sales. So could you shed some light on that? Do you have like a cutoff that you don't press release anything below 5 million SEK, or how do you do it?
So we do have a cutoff. 5 million is traditionally a number we use. But we do press release some things below that. What we tend not to press release is we sell many small components, we make many small sales to let's say to universities or even companies, and many times those are not press released. What we sometimes do, not always, but sometimes do, is we do an aggregator press release where we say we sold so much of these over the last few months. But we don't always do that. One of the things also that wasn't included, that is not press released, but it was recognized as revenue, is the royalty that we got last year. So last year we got quite a lot of royalties from licenses, from our licensees, and that was not press released as an order, but it is recognized as revenue. So that also accounts. So that also enters in that calculation. And my CFO assures me that is the reason for the difference.
Just the last accounting type question here. We'll try to keep it short. We're firmly into the coffee break now. But you did what you said for Q4. You delivered a positive EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, deductibles, and amortization is the A. But then, if we take away the depreciation and amortization and shorten it to EBIT, you were minus 36.8. So that's about a 38 million SEK difference. What are those 38 millions? That's because on EBIT you still made a loss, 38 million, but you were positive without the D&A.
Yeah, so we've got amortizations of satellites that are in orbit, on depreciation on assets in orbit, and also we have the write-off that is included in there. But it's mostly the depreciation on debt, and those are investments that we do over time, and they have to be depreciated. So, and they have a calendar, and that is it's the large bulk of that.
So what we look for, of course, is that EBIT also turns positive. Do you have any idea when that will happen? Do you have a goal, a vision?
We haven't made a forecast on that. Of course, my objective has always been to actually deliver positive EBIT. But it's a journey. We are on that journey, but that is our objective. Our objective is not to. We don't want to just deliver positive EBITDA. We want to actually, in the future, my objective is to deliver dividends to our shareholders. So that's the target and that's the objective. We haven't yet made a forecast on that. We might later this year do a forecast on that. Might.
Okay. Louis, thank you very much for presenting with us here on ProHearings. Let's give him a...
Thank you.
We hope to see you here next time.